Hey everyone, my name is Josh Proctor, and this is the Life on Side B podcast. On this podcast, we are going to discuss, as the name pretty much clearly states, what life as Side B LGBT Christians is really like. For those of you who don't know, Side B is a term used to refer to Christians who are LGBT, attracted to the same sex, or have gender dysphoria, yet hold a traditional view of sexuality and marriage, and therefore live according to that view. Every episode, I will be talking with different Side B Christians about different aspects of their life, faith, and experiences. My goal with this podcast is to show that being Side B is not this depressing life of self-hatred and loneliness, but rather, it can be pretty dang beautiful and amazing. Now, every season, we will be focusing on a different theme of sexuality and faith issues related to the lives of Side B Christians. This season, though, I am really excited because we are going to be looking at different ways Side B Christians live out their sexuality and find intimacy and community. I hope that through this season, you will be able to see that there are so many different ways that Side B Christians can live with joy within their faith. Today, we are going to talk to Melinda Melone on the intentional community that she lives in San Francisco, and really get her perspective on what it's like to be an intentional community as a Side B person. Now again, like last time, we talked over Zoom, so the quality may not be perfect, but I really hope that you enjoy it. So with that, let's head into the episode. Okay. Well, hello everyone. We are back again with the second episode of Life on Side B. And it is a huge accomplishment. We've gotten to the second episode and we haven't made fools of ourselves, though some of you probably may disagree with me on that one. But I am here joined by my great friend Melinda and her Melinda Melone. And that is the correct, I am pronouncing it correctly, right, Melinda?
Yes, Melinda
Okay.
Melone, pronouns she,
Okay.
hers.
Ooh, perfect. So I know Melinda because we have actually had the awesome opportunity of being on a panel in a workshop together at the QCF conference back just this January. I feel like I've known you for a lot longer than that, but I guess through the side, through the Facebook group. But that was the first
time. Were you
time.
at Revoice?
I was at Revoice, but did we meet there?
I think we met briefly.
Anyway. Possibly. Anyway, I am so glad that you're on here. And for those of you who do not know Melinda Melone is a member of the Church of the Sojourners, an intentional Christian community in San Francisco, California. She has spoken at gay Christian conferences such as the Q Christian Fellowship, Revoice and E3, and presented workshops at children ministry conferences such as Faith Forward and Weaving Our Gifts on how to make churches more welcoming for LGBT youth and families. She also serves as the QCF Side B Advisory, on the QCF Side B Advisory. See, I can't even read. She's the mom of a grown son and works at as a Montessori educator and administrator. Well, first of all, you do so many things that I'm just so jealous of. And I love it. So I guess to start off, the question that I would like to ask is, what is Side B to you, if that makes any sense?
Right, sure. Side B to me is the conviction by gay and bi Christians that we are called to celibacy because genital sexual expression is reserved by God for monogamous heterosexual marriage.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you always held to Side B theology, or can you share a little bit of maybe your story?
Sure.
or where you've gotten to where you're at?
I've always held, I haven't always held a Side B because I didn't know it existed. But if anybody asked me, I'm old enough that gay marriage was not a thing when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was assumed that, well, gay wasn't hardly a thing when I was growing up. The first gay person I ever heard about was Elton John. And I knew I wasn't like that, so it didn't apply to me.
Yes.
So I didn't figure out that I was gay until I was 34, and that was in 1996. And at that point in history, gay marriage still wasn't really a very common thing. It wasn't an option. So to be gay and out meant that you were sexually active.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the gay people I knew who were celibate were still in the closet, or, I only knew they were gay because they told one or two people, including me.
Yeah.
So I was raised Catholic. And then after I was Catholic, I was a member of various evangelical churches. So the assumption was always that gay people would not have the option of marriage, and I always knew that sex outside of marriage was wrong. So coming up before these distinctions were being made, makes it a little bit different from being always side B, because the idea that marriage is an option, but we're deciding not to take that option, is a fairly new phenomenon.
Yes.
So I grew up Catholic, and then after a number of years as an adult, where I had, been attending or working for non-Catholic churches, I finally left the Catholic Church, and the churches I went to were all what we would call side B churches at this point.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So in my life, side B became a thing sort of fairly late in my life. It wasn't like I grew up knowing, okay, there are these options, side B or side A.
Yeah.
It was a different kind of path.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that that's not just for your time, like even me. I mean, I knew that there was never like necessarily this understanding of like, hey, there's these different options of how to live, and of being able to understand that in that way. So, and honestly, for me, that's even just been in the last few years. So I totally understand.
Yeah, I think the landscape is really changing a lot. The deciding what your choices are, what your options are, looks very different now than it did even 15 years ago. So I think people's decisions are in some ways clearer and in some ways more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I came to celibacy after having been in a mixed orientation marriage for 25 years. So that's a somewhat different type of decision as well.
Yes.
So when I figured out I was gay, I was already married. I'd already been married for 10 years.
And how was that like for you? Like realizing that you're gay while in a heterosexual marriage?
Well, because I was Catholic, it wasn't and because I didn't fall in love with anybody, it wasn't like I was going to leave my husband.
Yeah.
So it was, what was it like? It was like being in a marriage with a person you're not really sexually attracted to. And I told my husband when I figured it out, and I told him it wasn't going to change anything, and it didn't for another, 15 years. And then we got divorced, not because of me, but because he decided that once our son was grown, he wanted to have, sort of a new life of his own.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So
now, how did you go from, being married, then you got divorced, and how did you then find the community that you're in now? And I guess, can you explain a little bit of how you found it? And then also, can you explain a little bit of what your community is? Like, how would you define it?
Sure. Church of the Sojourners is a very unique little community. I actually knew the people who started it more than 30 years ago.
Oh.
It was founded by a group of, there were two Baptist missionary families who were doing outreach to Salvadoran refugees in San Francisco. And they and a group of students who were graduating from university at UC Santa Cruz decided to all move in together and start this community. So I went to college with the women from Santa Cruz who moved in with the missionaries in San Francisco. And so I knew the community from its inception. And then as I lived in the Bay Area a few years later, And while my husband and I were there, I went and volunteered. The community had, at that point, was doing a summer school program for neighborhood kids, basic literacy and bilingual education. And so the community was doing this as an outreach. And I came and volunteered in their program one summer. So I was over in the house that I'm living in now, tutoring kids in their neighborhood and hanging out with these folks. And so there are pictures of me from 30 years ago in this community, which is really kind of funny.
So
because
crazy.
then my life took a very different turn, and my husband and I moved out to Washington, D.C., and we ended up staying there for 25 years. When I got divorced, I came out more publicly as gay, and I started getting involved in what was then called GCN, the Gay Christian Network.
Yes.
And GCN had a local Baltimore, Washington area Bible study. And so I was going to the Bible study, and we were reading different books about gay Christians. And I picked up a book by a guy named Tim Otto called Oriented to Faith. And I started reading it, and I was like, hey, wait a minute. This guy lives with people I know. Tim Otto is in the Church of the Sojourners.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so I started reading the book, and I was like, oh, I remember those guys. Hey, I could go there now. So it was because of my gay Christian Bible study that I was pointed back to this community that I'd known about all along. But while I was married, it was never an option for me. Not because they don't take married people, but because my ex-husband wasn't interested.
Yeah.
So at the same time, the same year that I read Tim's book, my son was graduating from college. And he was going to college in Baltimore. And I had told him that after the divorce, that we got divorced his senior year in high school. I told him that I would stick around in Maryland until he was done with college. So I just happened to read Tim's book. At the same time, I happened to be getting ready to move out of Maryland.
But you hadn't planned, like, before reading that book, had you planned where you were going to go necessarily? No? Wow.
Actually, I was applying to a lot of jobs. I interviewed for a teaching job in Rwanda. I interviewed for a teaching job in Belize.
Wow.
I could have gone anywhere.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I was thinking about joining the Peace Corps. I was thinking about a lot of different things. And what God was thinking about, apparently, was Sojourners.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Sojourners started in one house in San Francisco. And then during the tech boom of the 90s, we had a couple of techies in the community. And we ended up, having some assets and buying 3 more houses. So our community now owns 4 houses in San Francisco within a few blocks of each other.
Okay. And
all of the full members, what we call the covenant members of the community, live in one of those 4 houses.
Okay.
Along with their families. And then we also rent out rooms in those houses because we don't fill up all 4 houses right now. We rent out rooms in those houses to friends, family, people who are, working for YWAM, people who are working for other organizations that we know of in the community.
Yes.
And in addition to living together, we get together to pray and worship on a very regular basis. Each house has morning prayers daily. Each house
individually.
Yeah.
Okay.
So each household has, like our morning prayers are 6:15. The Florida Street house is at 6:30. I think the 22nd Street varies. Like sometimes they have their morning prayers at 9 in the morning because they get up late. But But
I like that house. I'm a late morning person, so that would be my house. It's kind of fun. It sounds like this is. I'm so sorry to break up, but this is me and my brain. I'm just literally thinking of it almost like a Harry Potter thing where you have the 4 houses and like, which house do you belong to?
Which house did the sorting hat put me in?
Yes. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. It's not quite that stable, actually, because every year we have a move day and we shuffle around between the houses depending on the needs of the community.
Okay.
So, for example, my first year I was in Florida Street House, and now I'm in Potrero Street House. So Potrero House.
Yeah.
And then 22nd Street. There are actually 2 houses on Florida. One's called the Florida House, and the other one's called the Montessori, because when we first bought that house, it was all single guys.
Oh, okay. Makes sense.
So in my house, we meet together for prayer in the morning. We meet together for dinner 3 times a week as a household, and then twice a week as a whole church. So Friday evenings, we have dinner and Bible study together as the whole church. And Sunday afternoons, we have dinner and gathered worship at 4:35 in the afternoon. And then most Tuesday nights, we also have community meetings that we call discernment meetings.
Okay.
And one Saturday a month, we have community work days where we do, yard work and work on the houses and do various things around the neighborhood. And let me see if that's all the meetings. And then various miscellaneous meetings as well.
Yeah.
So we live together. We share our lives. We have what we call a limited common purse. That is, we all get our own paychecks and have our own bank accounts, but we all live at the same economic level. So basically, my paycheck comes in, I pay my food and my rent to the community because we do all our grocery shopping together.
Okay.
And then I pay my other expenses like car expenses, health insurance, things like that. And then anything left over above a certain amount, I give back to the church. So no matter how much we make, we all have the same amount of spending money. So we keep a common economic level. So that gives us a lot of money to give away.
Yeah.
Not all that much, because most of us work part-time deliberately because our life is so time consuming that, we want to have a lot of present time for our structured stuff and also just to be in each other's lives.
Yeah, it makes sense.
The biggest value for us is loving one another well so that we can then love the community. Wow. And love takes time. So we tend to emphasize that we don't want people in full-time, high-tech or hardcore jobs. For example, I'm a teacher, but I deliberately took a part-time teaching/administrative job rather than a full-time classroom job so that I would have time for the community.
Wow. That is really interesting. It's interesting, especially after last episode with Meg, we talked to her about her situation, and she even said in the episode that her situation is intentional, but it's not where they have meetings, everyone does their own food, everyone, but they'll come together and do things together. So it's very interesting how your guys' community is much more structured. I know you said it's not as structured as Harry Potter, but it is more structured than other communal living situations. And so that's really interesting. What would you say, where do you think the Bible has influenced the development of this kind of living situation for you guys?
Sure. Our touchstones pretty much are the Sermon on the Mount, which we consider a collective. Blessed are you who mourn in community, for you will be comforted in community. It's not directed at individuals per se, but at the people of God. And so Jesus's people need to be together in each other's lives deeply in order to mourn with each other and comfort one another. That when there are poor among us, they need to inherit something, and that means they have somebody to inherit from. So the poor and the rich need to live together in order to share. So that's one touchstone. Another one is the second chapter of the book of Acts, where they all lived and had things in common.
Yes.
And how many problems that caused.
Exactly.
Whose widows are getting fed first? What if we sell a piece of land? Who owns the cars? All of those issues should be, live issues in a community. And that's where, in a sense, the rubber hits the road for Christian life together, is when it's that deep and that costly that you get on each other's nerves all the time and that you have to work through conflicts and things like that. And then the third one is really the one another passages. The New Testament epistles are full of, and the book of John, are full of love one another type things. And in order to do that, you need to spend a lot of time together. Yeah. So the essence, the ethic that we're going for has been influenced by the Bible in those ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that you talked about the conflicts in Acts, because I think that's something that we never really pay attention to when we read Acts. Like, it used to always frustrate me when churches would look at the Acts, and not that it's not an example, but saying like, look, it's the perfect community. Look how they lived. But then when you really read Acts, like, they had so many problems, and that doesn't negate how they lived, but it just shows the reality. Right. Like, that's what it's like to live in community.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus wouldn't have had to say you have to forgive your brother 70 times 7 if you weren't living with somebody who got on your nerves 70 times 7 times.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. And so with that kind of what in that realm of looking at that, what would you say have been the biggest challenges for you within the community, living in the community?
for me personally, the biggest challenges have been probably personality conflicts.
Mm.
You move into a group of people that I had met but didn't really know. Uh, so none of the people who started the church, except for one older lady, the wife of one of the original missionaries, was actually still in the church when I came in. So it wasn't like I was moving back to hang out with my college friends. These were people who had moved into the community over the last 30 years. And so I was basically moving in with a bunch of strangers. And I moved in with 2 other new people. We have a program called the apprenticeship program where you just come and try it out for a year.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so I was an apprentice along with 2 much younger people. In fact, their ages added together was still less than mine. Uh, so, and among the 3 of us, there were some conflicts. We were new to community. We were in a new situation. We were very, very different people. We still are very, very different people. All 3 of us are still in the community. And the sort of the personality conflicts and learning how that's handled in the community. For example, one of the other apprentices had a habit in meetings of I'm going to make up something fake. I'm not going to say what this person really did.
That's fine.
So let's say this person had a habit of clicking their pen constantly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the kind of person who would just say to their face, "Will you knock it off?"
Yeah.
Well, a better way to do that would be to wait until after the meeting and gently take that person aside and say, "Hey, sometimes it annoys me when people click their pens during meetings. So I'd appreciate it if you could stop in the future."
Yeah.
So I had to go from being the first kind of person to the second kind of person. That
I
takes
totally
practice.
understand. Yeah.
And so for me, stepping on other people's toes was one of the hardest things, because I grew up in a big Italian family where we all stepped on each other's toes all the time and yelled and screamed, and realizing that everybody isn't that direct about conflict and that everybody doesn't appreciate being corrected in front of other people or
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. That was one of the biggest things that I had to learn coming into this particular community, because this is a very gentle community.
Yeah.
And of course, after I had said that in the meeting to this other person, one of the leaders, gently took me aside and said, in the future, you might want to take this person aside, not in front of them.
Exactly.
So I'm just learning a lot about how to love other people gently, even through conflicts, even through mistakes, even through that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so that's probably been one of the hardest things. Oddly enough, the other hardest thing for me is that in our schedule we take breaks
Mm-hmm.
because we have to visit our biological families sometime, right?
Oh,
We can't
yeah.
be. So, for example, over Christmas, we take a break where our church doesn't meet. Most people are traveling.
Mm-hmm.
But my biological family lives fairly near here and we're not particularly close. So I found that over the last few years, there have been times when I was the only one in the house because everyone else was traveling.
Mm.
And getting used to that, because one of the reasons I moved here was not to be the only person in the house.
Exactly.
So realizing that other people, balancing my needs with other people's needs and wishing that they would stay around, or getting to know the people who do stay around rather than, the people because in a group of 20 people, there'll be people you get along with better and people you get along with less well. You don't just mix, you just don't hit it off as well. And so if all the people I really wish to hang around with are off traveling, then I get to know the people that are staying instead, who I might not be people that I would naturally hang around with, but I get to know them better.
Mm.
So, but sometimes it can, even in community, you can be lonely.
Oh, yeah.
And so that part has been a challenge for me as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a major point that you hit on there, which is that you can be just as lonely in community as you can literally being all by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a matter of physical proximity. but
Mm-hmm.
emotional connectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes all the difference in the world. And yeah, it's listening over these past 2 episodes, it's been very interesting because I really think even what I've learned from my living situations is just like you said, that personality conflict, like when people's personalities that just rub you the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so different. And you realize parts of yourself that you never even knew were there when
Right.
interacting with other people.
Right.
Also, along with that, so those are kind of like the biggest challenges you've had. What would you say are the biggest benefits that have come into your life from living in like an intentional community?
Oh, the love.
Mm-hmm.
The the way this group loves one another is sort of our motto. One of the early influential pastors of this group was a guy named John Alexander, and the quote that's hanging in all of our kitchens is, "Love one another and keep doing the dishes." And part of that is because none of our houses have dishwashers because they're old houses.
Oh.
So we literally do the dishes. So
Mm-hmm.
but just the idea that people will be there for you, sharing life with you, in and out, whether or not they like you, whether or not you just stepped on their toes,
Yes,
they will still show up for you.
absolutely.
And that kind of commitment is pretty rare in our society outside of
Yes.
marriage.
Mm-hmm.
The idea, because this is our type of community is for long-term commitment.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, oh, I'm going to drop in and drop out, like a Catholic worker house, for example, where
Yeah.
that's communal, but people come in and out, or even, college where, yeah, we'll live together for a couple of years, but we assume we're moving on pretty soon. The people in this community are committed for the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of commitment is a real support. I know that just because I'm having a bad day, I don't have to be on my best behavior all the time. Just because I'm having a bad day doesn't mean I'm going to get kicked out. It doesn't mean they're going to stop talking to me. It doesn't mean, they ask if I need anything when I'm sick. They offer to do the laundry if they know I'm running behind, things like that. And vice versa. I live in a house that has a mom and dad and their 2 kids and one other single person in our apartment, and then a number of other single people downstairs. And so we eat dinner together several times a week, and we do the dishes together several times a week. And anybody in the house is aware of what's going on in everybody else's lives because you can't help it. So if one of their kids can't sleep one night, and so they're up till whatever, then we understand why they wouldn't get up at 6:15 for morning prayers, and that's
Absolutely.
fine. So cutting each other slack because we know each other's lives
Mm-hmm.
is a kind of love that you don't get, no matter how good your church friends are, if you only see them once or twice a week. And so that kind of family love, that kind of being there for one another, for people who are single, is really rare.
Mm-hmm.
And I am very fortunate that I found this little oasis of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I do have to say when I sat in on your workshop at the Q Christian conference,
Mm-hmm.
um, I loved it, first of all. And I was very fascinated by your guys' concept of the intentional community being very linked to the church. Like
Mm-hmm.
it almost seemed, and correct me if I'm wrong, like the two are in a sense the same thing, but also separate
Mm-hmm.
because they both founded together. Was the intentional community and the church founded together, or were they founded
It's the
separately?
same thing.
It's the
It's
same
not two
thing.
different. Everybody in the
That's
intentional community is in the
is in
church,
the
and
church.
everybody in the church is in the intentional community. Now, we have a few people, there are different levels of membership in our
Okay.
community. So the people who have been here the longest and have made the deepest commitment are called the covenant members.
Yes. Hmm.
And there are 8 of those right now.
Okay.
And then there are people on their way to covenant membership who are like apprentices or practicing members or novices. I'm a novice right now. I won't
Okay.
become a covenant member until June
Okay.
because it takes at least 3 years.
All right. Wow.
And so there's novices and apprentices, people on their way to covenant membership. And then there are people who won't be covenant members because of various situations or limitations in their lives, but they're what we call guest members.
Okay.
And some of them live in our housing and some of them don't. So they're part of the community in a sense, but there's one guy who lives with his mom because she's elderly and sick and needs him to take. He would be a covenant member if he could move back in. He used to live in housing, but when his mom got sick, he moved out. He moved back in with his mom. And as long as she's around, then, I mean, in the long run, she's going to pass on at some point, and then he will probably move back in with us. But right now, he's not a covenant member. But he's still part of our community in that sense. He's in one of our small groups. He's there every Sunday. He's on one of our worship teams, you know. So, and then there are people, we have a number of people with intellectual disabilities in our community who live in sheltered living situations, but they come to us for Sundays and holidays and retreats, and they're very much part of our community, but they don't live with us because we can't give them the kind of support they need.
Well, and I'm just so fascinated by that concept of that the intentional community and the church are the same thing. Coming from a very Southern Baptist background, as I did, when you're in the evangelical background and from a Southern Baptist background, there's a very big idea that the entire, like the purpose of the church, and I'm not criticizing this, I think it's fine, but that the main purpose of the church is to get as many people into it as possible because the goal is to save souls. So you just want to fill that building up with people, and that's fine. But I think then it for people who come from that background, it breaks that model of understanding to say the purpose of the church is also this community, this deep centered community that if we look at the original church, the first church, that was what they were. They were people that shared, they met in their homes. They may have not always lived in the same home, but they shared life together. And
the first century, nobody lived alone.
Exactly. No one lived alone.
They lived in households. And
yes.
You read in the New Testament of whole households being baptized together.
Yes, exactly.
And the idea that we're also intimately tied to one another as a body. A body has to be in physical proximity on a regular basis. Otherwise, it literally falls apart and decays.
Yeah.
But I think we've gotten into one of John Alexander's books is called Being Church. And the idea that you don't go to church, you don't do church, you have to be the church.
Be the church.
And I think more and more people are sort of coming back to that realization of what church can be and what being church can mean for them. And I think that's one thing that Sojourners has really had an emphasis on for quite a while.
Yeah, and I think one thing I'm noticing, kind of processing through all of this unintentional communities, is a lot of it comes back to like you said, breaking that that individual mentality, that it's all about me and my relationship with God, and like that one-on-one relationship, where as the Bible doesn't take that view. The Bible takes a view of it's the church and God, and the church being one person, and all of us being part of that one person.
Yep.
So I love it, and it's something that it's so hard to get out of that mentality as an American, to break it.
Yes, it is.
So changing gears a little bit, another thing I wanted to ask you about was, especially being a Side B person. Now, in your community, there are Side A believers, so people who are affirming LGBT, as well as you. And are there other Side B people in your community as well? Are you?
Yes.
Okay. So Side A and Side B. So what is that like for you?
Yeah. Well, it's one thing I should say is that although there are Side A gay Christians in the community, the community as a whole is non-affirming of same-sex marriage.
Okay.
So even the Side A people are committed to celibacy while they're in the community.
Okay. Okay.
So that's a little bit different than if, say, we had gay couples in
Yeah.
our church,
Yeah.
as well as
Mhm.
no. But as a church as a whole, up to this point, we have been of the more traditional view that marriage is
Mhm.
between a man and a woman.
Yeah. Well, that makes
Now
sense.
we're in a slow conversation as to whether to reevaluate that, partly
Mhm.
because we're in San Francisco,
Yes.
and to reach out to the community around us. Um, it's getting more and more difficult to be a credible witness for Christ and be non-affirming.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, but at this point, we have several gay and bisexual side A people in the community, but all of whom are celibate, and they don't even date,
Mhm.
because the commitment of the community at this point was that single people, whether straight or gay or bi, do not have sex outside of marriage.
Yeah.
So even our straight folks are celibate
Yeah.
unless they're married.
Mhm.
So there's that. So that's the first element there. The second element is that the fact that folks are side A and side B is so secondary to all the other issues that we do have in common,
Mhm.
that it hasn't been particularly problematic yet. None of our gay folks have fallen in love and wanted to get married yet.
Yeah.
If that comes up, that might be an issue.
Yeah.
Our longest running celibate gay guy is Tim Otto, who wrote this book,
Uh-huh.
and he actually had what they called a celebration, sort of a commitment ceremony to the church.
Okay, I
And
love that term. I'm sorry. For so many reasons.
yes, isn't it awesome? In fact, there's a movement of communities called the New Monastic Movement, and Shane
Yeah.
Claiborne's
Yeah.
Simple Way
Mhm.
is in it, and Ripper House in North Carolina. We have a common prayer book called Common Prayer, a liturgy for radicals.
Mhm.
And in the back of that book is actually a celibacy commitment ceremony, and it's
Okay.
based on Tim's.
Oh.
So he had a whole ceremony about committing to celibacy for life. He wears a ring. He had a whole, promise. He celebrates his anniversary.
Mhm.
So he made the whole commitment to celibacy very formal.
Yeah.
Other people who are celibate are not nearly that formal about it.
No.
They're just like, yeah, well, I don't date, period.
Exactly.
Um, and that's true of both the gays and straights and bi folks in our community. It's like some are very formal about it, some are much less formal about it. So that's one way it is.
Mhm.
I think.
Well, and sorry, if I can,
Go ahead.
I want to continue the question, but also
Mm-hmm,
kind of expand it a little bit,
mm-hmm,
because a little bit of what I want to get at with this question is one of the things I've always admired with your living situation, and not just your living situation, but your life and the ministry that I know that you do, is that you feel comfortable to work in very side A circles.
mm-hmm. Right.
And while the thing is that there's a lot of side B people that, whether because of their background coming from more conservative angles
Mm-hmm,
or whatever the reason might be,
mm-hmm.
they seem to feel like that's impossible. Like, how could a side B person be
Right.
in side A circles? And
Right.
so I would love to kind of you to speak into a little bit of, first of all, I guess, what do you feel has called you to be in maybe more side A circles than the normal side B person? And also,
Mm-hmm.
like, how is that for you?
Yeah, I think there are a number of factors. One is that I was married for 25 years and I'm in my 50s, and I'm just kind of over it. So for me, not that, desire is never an issue, but
Yeah.
for a lot of side B folks, being around side A folks is really hard, either because they get jealous because they want
Mhm.
what the side A folks have,
Yeah.
or they get tempted.
Mhm.
They see that, wow, those people are kind of available, and
Yeah.
what would that be like?
Yeah.
Those aren't issues for me.
Mhm.
And I think for a lot of younger side B people in particular, they should probably be wise about how much they mingle with side A gay Christians,
Mhm.
because it's so close. It's
Yeah.
like it makes you wonder about your own commitments.
Yeah.
And I think that is a genuine issue for a lot of Side B people. So,
Hmm.
so in some ways, it's safer for me to go into Side A spaces than it is for most Side B people, especially younger Side B people, or people who have never had a relationship, or people who have never, who've who feel the lack of that so acutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's part of it. Another part of it is my take on sin, because if I felt that the being in a same-sex relationship was threatening someone's salvation or was dooming them to hell, which some Side B folks do believe,
Hmm.
then I would not be able to do what I do, because all I would want to do would be tell them that they needed to save themselves. They needed to get out of this so they were okay. But I don't see it that way. I believe that same-sex relationships are an issue on which Christians in good standing can have genuinely different opinions.
Hmm.
Uh, and if their conscience and their reading of Scripture says to them that this is something that God can bless, then that's between them and God.
Yeah.
I don't think that I'm in any position to make that call for them or for God.
Hmm.
So, in a sense, I see people in Side A relationships kind of like I would see, say, a married Jewish couple, or
Yeah.
a married Muslim couple, or a
Hmm.
married Buddhist or Quaker or atheist couple. They don't hold to the same ethics that I do, and they will be judged by God according to their ethics, not according to mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if I felt that, oh no, I know that they're going to hell because of this, or I believe that they're in sin so deep that I shouldn't even fellowship with them,
Hmm.
which is also, an opinion that a lot of more conservative Side B folks have, then I couldn't do what I do. I couldn't be at QCF. I couldn't be hanging out at E3 with people who are, more affirming. So I think partly because of my own theological stance on it and the sort of limited view of the nature of the sin involved, if any, I
Yeah.
think I'm more able to be in Side A spaces than a lot of Side B people.
And I think that makes I think that makes a lot of sense. That's even something I've been kind of going through in my own views lately. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily have something very concrete on what I believe on it. But I think the main thing for me has been, I heard one person say, and I thought it was so good, is like, why am I going to judge a person just based off one aspect of their life and allow
Mm-hmm.
that to be the one determining thing that changes how I interact with them?
Mm-hmm.
you know like you said, a Muslim couple or a Jewish couple, like I have friends that do ministry in the Middle East, with
Mm-hmm.
Muslims who have multiple wives, and
Mm-hmm.
do I believe they're going to hell because they have multiple wives? No. No,
Right.
it's a matter of our faith in Christ. Like, we have to make that distinction of what saves someone. Is it being in a straight relationship and being celibate? No, it's faith in Jesus, and
Mm-hmm.
it is our belief in Him as our Savior, and deciding to follow Him as the King of our lives and of our world, and that's what saves people. Sorry, I'm like going into this whole thing, but I get it.
Please.
Yes. So anyway, with all of that, I love it. I love what you shared. So yeah, and I
Now,
think
that said,
uh-huh.
I do believe they're wrong. They're
Yeah.
incorrect.
Uh-huh.
Their hermeneutic is faulty. But that's true of most people I know.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could disagree with somebody on something, on
Mm-hmm.
anything. For example, I'm a pacifist, and Sojourners is sort of loosely Mennonite-ish. But I don't think people are going to hell for not being pacifists. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think, people in the military should be shunned. I don't think, people who are wrong on this, I think, very important issue. We
Yeah.
don't treat that issue the way we treat sexuality. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we've, put this big red line around a sexual sin that doesn't exist around any other kind of sin. Economic sin. I mean, hello, the real sin of Sodom was treating the poor and the stranger badly.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
let's be consistent in how we think about our own ethics and how we apply them to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Now, kind of going back to the intentional community thing, if there is someone listening to this podcast and really interested in this idea, and I want to be part of this, what recommendations would you give for someone who might be interested in intentional community?
Well, there are two ways to go. One is to join an existing intentional community, and the other is to start your own. So, if you're looking to join an intentional community, come visit one.
Yeah.
We have hospitality weekends where if you can get yourself to San Francisco, you got free room and board for the weekend.
Woo.
And you hang out with us. Yeah, this is a serious, real, open, standing invitation.
Yeah.
Get in touch with our community, and we'll put you up in one of our guest rooms, and you'll see how we live for the weekend. And then the next step after that would be to apply to our apprenticeship program. So that's in our specific community. But most communities that I know of encourage visits and will welcome people to come and hang out with them and see what life is like. I think that's probably the first step if you're looking to join a community. And there's an organization called Nurturing Communities. It's nurturingcommunities.org.
Okay.
That has a list of Christian intentional communities that you can explore and visit. The Nurturing Communities Network has annual gatherings for people from a lot of different communities and has sort of mentors that has people that go out to other communities and say, we can help you get started. We can advise you on how to do this. If you're having a conflict in your new little community, we can help you work through it. So nurturingcommunities.org is a good resource. There's also a book by a guy who runs this organization named David Jansen, and it's called, let me check the exact title in case you want to Google it.
Yeah.
It's something like the handbook, but we just call it the handbook. What do we call it? The Intentional Christian Community Handbook, which is a great resource for folks who want to start their own.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think the best thing is if you're interested in community, visit some communities, visit several different communities of different types, and get to know, what the options are. If you're looking to start a community of your own, get together a bunch of friends that are willing to commit for a couple of years at a time at least, and think through things like how you want to handle prayer, how you want to handle money, how you want to handle community outreach, things like that.
I love that. I would love just to see like a huge wave. I mean, I know that there's already a lot of intentional communities starting to pop up, but just like a wave of intentional communities around just the country to kind of rechange this idea of what it means to be in community within Christianity. So thank you so much.
Each generation, there's another wave. So, I mean, when Sojourners started back in the 80s, there was a wave of intentional communities that were still around. There was a wave of intentional communities in the 60s, some of which are still around. There was a wave of intentional communities around the turn of the century when Simple Way got started and some of the other new monastics, sort of Shane Claiborne's generation. And now I think there's another wave kind of coming around again. So the thing is, though, community is tough to maintain over the long haul.
Yes.
And so out of, 20 communities that I know of that started around 2000, 3 are still existing.
Yeah.
So, and that's just a reality, partly because, life just gets hard, and partly because Americans are so used to moving on when things get tough.
And I think that that's like with all community, and I think that's why the word intentional is so key. It takes intention. We're going to keep doing this. In my own personal family, recently we had my grandmother die, who is the patriarch, matriarch of our family. And it has she was the last of, the grandparents in our family. And, when that happens in a family, and our family is so close, all of my cousins, all my aunts, we all live in the same town. We all get together all the time. And in those kind of moments is those moments when you as a family or as a community have to decide, are we going to keep working to keep this together? And yes, it'll
Mm-hmm.
change. Yes, things are not going to be exactly as they were because people get older, new kids, come in, all of these different kinds of things. But it takes the intention side of it. But
Mm-hmm.
I get what you mean. So that is great. I really want to thank you for everything you've shared here today. Before we go, though, is there any other last words you'd like to share on intentional community with everyone? Anything that really hasn't been shared yet?
I think the most important thing for people looking for community is that you're never going to find the perfect community. You're never going to find one that meets all of your specifications. So the most important thing is not shopping well, but listening to God well and
Yes.
finding out where God is really calling you. And it may be very unexpected. Some of the members in this community came from very unexpected places. And some of the members of this community are people I would never expect to be doing life with.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's
But
a really good.
This is where I'm called. And so it works.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That's a huge point. So, well, thank you again for all of this, all of taking your time to be here
Oh, it's a
and to
pleasure.
share your thoughts. For all of you guys, if you're interested in learning more about intentional community, obviously there is the opportunity, as Melinda shared, with what are the weekends called again?
Hospitality weekends.
Hospitality weekends. If you're interested in joining an intentional community that's already existing, take advantage of those kind of opportunities, looking for those kind of opportunities. If you want to learn more, obviously I shared in the last episode, Meg Botts from our last episode is going to be doing a workshop and Revoice on communal living. And so I would continue to encourage that. And reaching out just to Meg or Melinda if you get a chance, and I'm sure that they would be happy to share their thoughts continuing. So thank you, Melinda. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Yes. And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Hey everyone, thanks so much again for joining us today, talking to Melinda. And I really hope that you got a lot out of it. The last 2 episodes talking about communal living have been an amazing time for me, for sure. And I have learned a lot about our need for community and the place that our spiritual family plays in our lives, no matter what our context is like. So I hope that you've gotten a lot out of it too. I would love to hear your thoughts. You can reach out through any of our social media platforms, as well as emailing lifeonsidebpodcast@gmail.com. Again, would love to hear from you. Also, be on the lookout for our next episode, which will be airing on Wednesday, May 29th, and I cannot wait for you all to hear it. Thanks again for listening to Life on Side B. Now remember to be the face of Jesus for someone this week. Talk to you soon.